Welcome, friends, to the first Run from the Norm podcast episode of 2025. I'm your host, Jayk Reynolds, and boy, do we have an absolutely incredible story of redemption, strength, resilience, and ultimately a rebirth of sorts. Joining me is Ashley Kate Whittaker, known to her family and friends as AK, a woman whose life reads a lot like a Hollywood movie script. From a 4.0 high school student to the depths of addiction and incarceration, AK found her way back from what could only be described as the depths of personal hell when she finally decided to embody one of the mantras that still drives her today: be the change. Today, she's not only conquered some major races like the New York and Boston marathons, she's committed herself first and foremost to being the best mom she can be to her two young sons. She is a successful health and run coach working for the YMCA in the races department, and she's also the training programs coordinator for Fleet Feet Meridian and Nampa, owned by friend and past podcast guest Alex Mimlitz and his fiancée Megan Lacey. But what makes AK's story truly remarkable isn't just how far she's come, it's how she's turned her darkest moments into a mission of service, extending a hand to others who are where she once was. And wait till you hear about the major health crisis that nearly derailed all the work she had put in to redefine her story, and how she had to now fight her way back yet again to find the physical and spiritual balance that has brought her to where she is today. Get ready, friends, for a raw, unfiltered conversation about hitting rock bottom, finding redemption through fitness and running, and the incredible power of second chances. You know what time it is. It's time to run from the norm. Okay, Ashley Kate, otherwise known as AK, to your family and friends.
Yes.
Thank you for taking the time to join me on this episode of the podcast. And I want to start with a question. What 3 words would you use to describe the person sitting in front of me today?
Ooh, authentic, vulnerable, and strong.
So when you say vulnerable, you immediately start getting emotional.
I do.
What is it behind that hits you right from the get-go?
You know, just sitting here in front of you, I feel a little vulnerable. I feel vulnerable to the girl that I was 20 years ago. And it's really hard when you have a colorful past, I'll put it like that, to be your most authentic self, to be transparent to others. And that was a choice I made a little more than 20 years ago, was, you know, I'm going to be transparent and I'm going to do the right thing. And it puts you in a vulnerable place.
It does. What led to that decision?
Well, I guess we'll jump right in.
Yeah, let's start. Yeah. Let's start from the beginning then.
Okay.
Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Boise, Idaho, North End.
You're a North Ender.
Yes, I am. I'm a very North Ender. I was technically born in Colorado.
Okay.
And I think I was 13 days old when I came home to my parents.
Oh wow. Okay.
I'm adopted.
Okay.
And I came on a plane, and my parents brought me home, and they've always been my parents. And I grew up in the Collister area. My dad was a school teacher. My mom was like an office manager in an insurance office, you know, in a very, middle-class home.
Mm-hmm. And then where did you go to high school?
Capitol High.
And what kind of a student were you?
Oh, I was an excellent student.
Yeah. What was your favorite course?
You know, I loved math.
Really?
Yeah.
What was it about math?
It was the algebra.
Really?
I loved solving puzzles.
Interesting. I think when I got into math and got into algebra, and I think I did some calculus and stuff too, I lost interest. I couldn't follow it. But I got to know the teacher really well because I was always in trouble.
I loved figuring out what the missing component was.
Oh, okay.
And those word problems that were kind of stories. I liked figuring out the mystery.
What did you do outside of that? Were you athletic? Were you?
Not at all. I was a cheerleader in junior high, but my parents really, really geared me towards music, performance. I wanted to be in drama. My parents really just wanted me to learn a foreign language and play an instrument.
Oh, okay.
That was very important to them. I wanted to be a singer. When I was 13, I think I was in 7th grade, I wrote we had to write a journal. And one of my stories that I wrote for my 7th grade teacher was that I was going to be a famous singer when I grew up.
Really? Who was your biggest influence?
Oh, man, when I was little, Debbie Gibson.
Oh, yeah. Loving some Debbie Gibson.
Yeah. I wasn't allowed to listen to secular music growing up, so she was kind of, off limits.
Oh, okay.
Singer
she was
to listen
pushing the
to.
Boundaries.
Right. Yeah. My first concert that I ever went to was Amy Grant with my mom.
Okay.
So my family was fairly religious growing up.
Mm-hmm. I'm right there with you. Actually, I was even baptized in the LDS church, and yeah, we can go off on a tangent on the experiences of growing up in religion and how that impacts you, whether you stay in it or if you kind of move outside of it. Would you say is that something that's followed you, through your into your adult life?
In a very different way. I have a very big concept of God in the universe.
Yeah. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So I don't believe in God the way that the Bible describes God. Mm-hmm. Now, my 13-year-old son, on the other hand, has a deep passion for Jesus Christ. And I support him going to church, and I take him to youth group, and I support his beliefs and spirituality. And
it's self-discovery.
Yes. I think that there is a big piece of our soul that is a part of the universe, and that will actually guide us into being the best version of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So let's jump back into where you're kind of coming through high school and you're getting in good grades, and you want to be a singer, but you're also doing some instruments. I think you said you played violin and some piano.
Well, I started with piano when I was very young, 6 or 7, and I remember my dad playing alongside of me. We'd play, what's that? Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah,
Heart and Soul.
Heart and Soul. Yeah.
Playing Heart and Soul is a really good memory that I have with my dad. He learned how to play Chariots of Fire on the
that's awesome.
On the piano, and he was really proud of that. And I hadn't even thought about that until this moment. So that must have been really impactful for me.
Absolutely.
And then I wanted to sing. I just wanted to sing, and I got into a program called the Boise Summer Music. Mm-hmm. There was
I remember that.
Yeah, a gentleman named Mr. Griffin. He was the vocal instructor, and it was either at North Junior High is where we went. And I got to do some summer programs for singing, and I was really good. I remember winning awards, and I don't feel like people were just telling me I was good. I remember feeling like a feeling that happened when I was behind the microphone and singing my solos, and I just wanted to sing. Back then, I felt about singing the way I feel about fitness, exercise, and running now. And so it was just another somatic feeling, right? It was another intuitive way that my body was telling me I was doing something that was bringing my soul pleasure.
Is that something that you still do? Do you still sing?
No, I do in the shower and I do in the car.
Right.
But I've put my vocal cords under so much distress over the last 20 years that, especially with my job and my career and what I do for a living, it doesn't sound like it used to.
It's changed. Oh, we all get older and our voices change.
I'm starting speech therapy next week, and I'm very excited about it. So we're going to try to heal some of my vocal cords.
Oh, okay. So, and I don't know if this might be a segue. Let's, as you were kind of coming through high school, some things changed for you, and, things were going in a good direction. You had, good grade point average, you're singing, and some life kind of took a turn for you.
It sure did. I still graduated top of my class. I had a music scholarship to, we called it back in the day, SPU, which was Seattle Pacific University. I had gone and visited some other Christian universities that my parents were big advocates for, my mother specifically. And about a year and a half, I was young. I had a summer birthday. And so I was a year behind everyone. All my friends in high school were driving before I could get my permit. It was just, I was kind of a year behind everything, and I was real small. I'm sure I was very petite in school. And because of my grade point average, I wanted to be able to take more electives in high school. And so I enrolled in summer school, not because I needed it, but to open up. Okay. So I actually was so non-athletic in high school that I took PE in summer school so that I could get it over with, so that I could take drama, choir, French. There were a lot of the arts classes, that I wanted to take. And in hindsight, it was such an interesting decision to see how completely 180, my desires, passions, and career has come. But I met a girl, and I won't elaborate too much into it, but she was really cool, and she was real rebellious. And I didn't know it at the time. Through therapy, I've now realized that I didn't have any autonomy. I didn't get to make decisions for myself, even down. My parents had the best of intentions, and I mean no disrespect when I speak about my childhood. Like, I love both of my parents, like, with my whole heart. And I do know that they were doing the best that they could with the knowledge that they had at the time. But this girl, she wore cutoffs and tie-dyed shirts, and I knew she smoked, and it was really cool.
Just cool.
Just cool, she was so cool. And it started with small things like sneaking cutoffs in my locker to put on at school. And then, it grew into, trying to teach myself how to smoke cigarettes so I appeared cool to her, which I never really enjoyed. I didn't enjoy that. And over the course, to kind of make a long story short, over the course of the next 2 years, that turned into a drug addiction. It was back in the days when meth was crank. And I tried it one time. And
that was it.
It really was.
Interesting.
It was very secret and hidden for a while. I was able to hide it for a very long time. It wasn't as intense as it grew into an addiction 3 or 4 years later.
And was that were you just doing it with this friend, or were you doing it by yourself, or?
Mostly just with a friend, but with a drug that has that intensive and addictive, horn almost, that the best way to explain it becomes something that you do in private.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It went so far. In high school, I didn't really want to be doing the drug itself. That wasn't the appeal to me. But I liked being able to stay up really late and study and get really good grades on my tests the next day.
Because it's affecting you differently when you're first getting into it to when it becomes a problem
100%.
down the road. And if you're like me, I've been through, I didn't get to that extent. I've said before on earlier chat that I did, where I had trouble with cigarettes, alcohol. I've smoked truckloads of pot. I did acid and mushrooms and stuff, but I stopped when it came to those kinds of things like meth or cocaine or any of those things, because it scared the shit out of me, to put it bluntly. Is because you always hear if you do it one time, you're going down a dark tunnel, and I can imagine that that's kind of what happened, but it sounds like it's not something you wanted to promote out there, that, hey, this is what I'm doing. You're still trying to present yourself as this, person who's doing the right thing, who's making the right decisions, who's moving themselves forward, getting good grades. At what point did it start to shift where it's not something that's just helping you stay up at night, but it's really becoming a problem?
Oh, the minute I graduated high school.
Oh, okay.
I graduated high school. My dad, and I know you understand this from past conversation I've heard with you, is my dad decided to leave my mom, and they waited until I was 18, and so I graduated high school, and this sounds completely ridiculous, but I decided that the friends that I had met in the drug world were so cool, and I knew there was like this level up of like drug user you could be that's called a gangster, right? And so I was like, you know what? I have done so good in school. I have done everything my parents have wanted my whole life. I'm going to go be a gangster.
Ready to be a badass.
I was like, I'm going to go be a gangster. And so I went out and I did every wrong thing that I could think of to do, found the worst people. Well, I don't want to say bad people.
No, I get what you mean. I mean,
I found
people that they're not good influences, and they don't necessarily have your best interests at heart. They're on their own path and their own struggle.
Yeah. So I was still 17 when I graduated. So I ran away to Salem to stay with a girl that I had met through that same mutual friend, and just tried to immerse myself in this new alternative lifestyle. And I had a runaway charge.
Oh, okay.
And so when I finally was ready to come home, because it got kind of tiring pretty quick.
Yeah, I bet.
I started getting scared. And I came home and I called my mom, and I thought she was just going to be there to take me home. But they had the police there.
Oh, geez.
And they took me to jail. And so I went to juvenile. I had to go through a system where I had to go to big jail because I was 18. But I was there on a juvenile charge. And Jayk, I was so angry. I was angry. I was mad at my family. I had come home trying to get help. And that was really the pivotal point for me. I felt alienated. I felt, not supported.
Probably confused.
Very confused. Like, I called for help and now I'm in jail. And then they gave me this option to go back on, or to go on juvenile probation. And I had all these stipulations, that I had to do from home with a bracelet, like an ankle bracelet. And
if you don't abide by everything, you probably get in more trouble.
Yeah, but it wasn't that. It was I didn't want to be in the same environment where I had been given no personal freedom and no autonomy for my whole childhood.
Oh.
I just wanted to be able to...
Now that box just gets smaller.
It did, and it terrified me. So I did a thing called time and terminate.
What's that?
It's where you can just spend out the rest of your juvenile sentence in real jail. So I would spend the rest of my runaway, my 17-year-old runaway charge as an 18-year-old adult in the Ada County Jail.
And so this is, there's no drug-related charges with this. This is strictly a runaway charge.
No, just runaway.
And you're in jail for it.
Yes.
And what's the sentencing of this, the time of this look like?
I think it was like 56 days.
Holy smokes.
56 or 72.
Holy
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you're going through this, and then do you just make it through it and you find your way, back on a good path? Do you have trouble while you're trying to make it through it? Where does it go from there?
No. So in hindsight, I realized that the woman that befriended me, actually targeted me. I was a fun little, in this world that I became immersed in, was very cultural, very Hispanic. And, I was just this little white girl trying to have fun.
Naive.
In a gangster's world,
Yeah.
I'd seen some movies and,
you think but you don't. And It sounds like you had the best of intentions where you're just trying to be there and be a part of this thing. And maybe, I don't want to say you get taken advantage of, but it's to some degree, if, I said naive, if you don't really know the full scope of what's going on here, it's probably pretty easy to get, deeper into that than you intended.
Right. And I did. And I got deep very quickly. I got out, I lived with her, and getting to ride shotgun with a drug dealer is a really big deal.
Riding the adrenaline.
Yeah. And so, over the next probably 18 months, I did accrue a drug charge. I accrued numerous charges. And when I was done, I called the police.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I remember I was in a little trailer house up off of Ustick in Boise. And I was just tired. I was tired. I was sad. I was scared.
And how old are you now?
I was probably 20.
Okay.
Yeah, 20, 21, 22. I don't know that.
So just somewhere in there.
So 19 to 26, 27 is all kind of a blur. I was in and out of the system from that point, over the course of 7 years. I never spent more than a couple weeks out, a couple months out. And
when you say in the system, are you talking about in trouble, or are you talking about like in jail?
And so what I mean by in the system, that's a great question. When you're in the system, it means you're in the IDOC system. You have a felony charge. You're in the jail system, in the prison system. Sure. They call it a revolving door. This was 24 years ago. So things have changed a lot since then.
But once you're in it, it definitely complicates things. I used to work for the sheriff. I worked for Ada County, but I worked with sheriff's inmate labor detail. And so I, met a lot of people who were kind of stuck in that revolving door, as you're saying. And, once you get in, it's hard to get out.
Yes, it was it's very different now. Like the system has changed so much in the 2 decades that I've been out, quote unquote, of the system. But, I'd have good intentions. I'd get out and I'd think I could make it, and one person comes around with the drug of choice, and it was just I couldn't say no.
And you weren't doing anything at that point from going from being this good student, getting good grades and all that. It just completely left turn, and you're really not making any personal progress, I guess we'll say.
No. I didn't even hold a job.
Did you have any goals at that point? Or was it just so much of a focus on day-to-day that you really didn't give it much?
I think a focus on day-to-day. There was a point at which I had some goals. So the last time that I was released from prison, my time was done. But I had made some decisions a couple years prior to that. I had gone into jail and out of jail. I had gone to the prison in Pocatello and been out. But honestly, it was the last time I was transported from the Ada County Jail. Oh, this is where it gets...
Take your time.
Yeah. I was being transported from the Ada County Jail to Pocatello. And at this point, my mother had passed away. She died of cancer while I was in prison. Didn't get to say goodbye. I had some good family that did make sure that I was able to get escorted to the funeral. I don't know how they pulled those strings. I still don't. It was a good, my grandparents are pretty well off, but they had, at that point, I thought, written me off. And when I was being transported this last time, there's a couple of stops that they make along the way, but we were close to the Federal Way exit, and there's this billboard. And all it said was, "Be the change." And there was something down in the corner, which I now know was Gandhi. But I just saw that, and I sat in awe of those words for the 4-hour drive in the bus. And in a bus, you're shackled, right? You've got your ankles shackled, your hands are shackled. You're not allowed to sit next to anyone.
Is anybody talking, or is it just quiet?
I don't know that I remember a lot of conversation. You're not allowed to talk. The men and the women are separated if they're in the same bus, because they do drop-offs at county jails.
Okay.
And sometimes they house state inmates in county jails. And I'd already been in a handful of those housing situations. But this was the final hoorah. I had, 2.5 years left on my sentence. And I knew I was going to finish out my time. Something was starting to change inside of me.
So what did that mean to you then? You be the change. You said it happened to just impact you a little bit.
Yeah. So it just hit me, Jayk. I was like, wait a second. I don't have to wait for change to happen. Because I was in this holding pattern where I was waiting for something to change. Like, something's got to change. Something's got to change, AK. Like, what are you going to change? Like, how is it going to change? How is it going to be different this time?
Yeah.
I was scared to get out. I didn't want it to happen again. I'd been through so much pain, heartache. Some not so great things happened to me when I was in the prison. I wasn't a popular inmate, neither with the guards or the other inmates. And I ended up spending a lot of time in isolation. And I didn't want it to happen again, but I kept seeking some change that I thought needed to be extrinsic. I thought someone or something needed to change something for me.
Right.
And the whole ride, all I could think of is, I can be the change. So then I started looking for the change. I started looking, and within that next 2 to 2.5 years, I got involved with a recreation coordinator at the Pocatello prison. I did my first 11-hour ultra.
I saw that. That's what I wanted to ask you about. So it looked like you started getting into running and finding an outlet that way. Because I think you said you did 52 miles?
52 miles in 11 hours, which at that time, I didn't know was it could have gotten me a buckle, right? If I had done it twice. Right. I didn't know anything about that. I just knew that.
You're running for survival at that point.
Yeah. And I could be out of my cell the whole day if I did this relay race, the Susan B. Komen. And it was personal for me, right? Even in, the depths of this depressive state that I was in this place that I couldn't leave, there was an outlet. In hindsight, I now know that I was somatically helping my body and soul to heal.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about somatic
so
healing. And now I know that's what I was doing. But Mr. Vasterling was the recreation coordinator, and he had one arm, and he was just a cool man that believed in me. And he believed in a lot of other people too, but he believed in me. And he gave me opportunity to come and do extra duties in the recreation hall because he saw I actually wanted to work out. I started doing like an MTV dance video. It was actually, they were still VHS that they had there. They weren't even DVDs.
Oh, geez.
That's how old school the delivery system was. Yeah, and there was like a step, and I was doing some step aerobics videos. In fact, the step aerobics video that I did in prison was the first aerobics video that I bought on DVD as my own purchase, as an independent. I was a an almost mom at the time. It was a very exciting moment for me. But it was the same video because it was nostalgic and I knew it. And
It
I
had
knew
that
I
much
could.
of an impact.
Oh, yes. It was Denise Austin.
Nice.
I can still remember her backup people and those, I don't think about it often. But
You still remember the moves?
I do. I still remember some of those moves. I think I probably stashed that DVD somewhere too.
Oh,
I could find it on YouTube somewhere.
In a keepsake box somewhere.
Yeah. So
were you, sorry not to cut you off there, but so you did this 52-mile run, and I'm assuming it wasn't just kind of out of the box where it's like, oh, here's an opportunity, I'm just going to go run for 11 hours. I'm assuming you started building up to it?
Yeah. So I started looking around to see what was different about the women that other people didn't like, the other inmates. I hate to use that word, but
No, I mean,
realistically,
it's the word,
the other women that were there that nobody else wanted to hang out with that I looked at and I was like, they're definitely not coming back because they don't act like everyone else here. And there were these two women and they wore their socks differently. They didn't have the crew socks, they had the little ankle socks, which I now know are runner's socks.
Isn't it interesting, like the things that you pay attention to?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
And they went out and they walked and they ran every day and after every meal, every opportunity that they got. And I had actually met those two women when I was at the work center, but that memory followed me to the prison when I was there. And so I just started exercising. I started running. I started exercising. I started using any opportunity that I had to really be able to sweat in a healthy way. And so when this opportunity presented itself, I got to run for 11 hours. I mean, I took sandwich breaks and walked. And, the first lap was done with anyone who was a cancer survivor. And so I walked the first lap with Mr. Vasterling. That I believe is how he lost his arm, but I don't remember quite 100%. And so after that opportunity, the Pocatello prison allowed the newspaper to come out and interview me about that.
Interesting.
And so it was called An Army of One. Was the article.
Really?
And I didn't know that was like an army slogan, but it was an opportunity that I had to actually tell people what I was doing and why, and honor my mother and kind of make a public declaration that like, this is who I am now. The things that I used to do are no longer embodied in the human that I want to be. And so I just decided to be the change. Like, I didn't need anything to change for me.
Yeah.
I became the change.
I love that.
It was, thank you, man. And it became my like soul slogan. I've had these 3 soul slogans throughout my lifetime. And it started with, be the change. Be the change you wish to see in the world. I found out what the quote meant later, and who had written it. And so when I went to the work center for the last, I think 8-9 months of my sentence, I had an opportunity to go out and work in a restaurant or wherever. But I made a decision that I wanted to be a little more accountable. I didn't want to disrupt or have the temptation of having that much freedom. And what felt right to me, because I had been in and out a few times, my driver's license was still good. And so I just requested to be a driver, and then they sent me to the work center. And so they didn't have a lot of people with valid driver's licenses.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
And you're kind of the accountability holder when you're the driver.
Gives you this sense of responsibility.
Yeah, you have to get people to and from their job. You're not allowed to stop on the way. They had GPS, inside of little black boxes at that time. You actually had to know where you were going still at this point. There were not GPS devices in you couldn't have a phone.
They're not just sending you a free for all, we'll see you in a few hours.
Yeah, this was I was 26, 27. So, 20 years ago. So, was that 2005? 2007.
And you're still running at this point.
Yeah, and I had even more freedom to run. So now I'm in Boise. I'm in my hometown. And if you've ever been up on those Table Rock trails, and you look down, that's the work center. That's the women's work center.
Oh, okay.
And so there's a track outside, and I still to this day go and run by that track. They're not as stringent on their rules about them speaking with strangers. So there have been a few times that I've seen the women out there walking, and I'm like, keep doing that, man, keep doing that. I'm proof that it can be done.
That's awesome.
You don't have to go back there. And I got to be in the track, and there's a little workout room in the basement. I started doing Billy Blanks. It was Billy Blanks era at this point. There were actually DVDs and not VHS tapes.
They're moving up in the technology.
Yeah. And so I volunteered at the botanical gardens. I got to learn a little bit about, weeds and how to keep our trails safe. And I would always look up and I'd see people on the trails, Table Rock trails. I didn't know that's what they were at the time. I thought they were just, and I was like, you know what? Someday I'm going to be running up there and I'm going to see the women down here and I'm going to just send them all the positive energy that I can. But most importantly, I'm going to look back on that track and remember, like, that's where my story began.
Everything changed at that point.
Yeah.
So when you finish all this up and the sentencing is done, what does it look like? Because, I mean, I assume you can't just come out and run in somewhere and get any job you want.
No.
I'm sure there's a lot of difficulty that you're faced with at this point. And like you said, now you have all this freedom, but these years have gone by and you're rediscovering yourself. What do you do?
Man, it's so hard, Jayk. At that point, I was still within Idaho's 7-year statute, where if you've had a felony within 7 years, you have to mark it on job applications. And, I've always been a pretty astute girl. So I knew what rules I needed to look up to be able to, find a sense of direction and of career, right? I knew there was a direction I wanted to go, and it was with fitness. And so I went to and I think part of this is my own naivety. I was very full of life and hopeful.
So you're ready to tackle the world at that point. You have your freedom back.
I was ready. I was going to go become a trainer. I wanted to be a trainer. I didn't know how to go to school to be a trainer, but I knew trainers worked at gyms. And so I went. I didn't have a car. I had a little bit of money saved up. I always had an inmate job. And so I saved as much as I could. My grandparents were minimally supportive at this moment. I kind of burnt my bridge there coming in and out. They were just, my grandpa
Probably
was
just a little bit worried. They just want to make sure that you are putting yourself on a right path and they don't potentially contribute to, falling back in a bad pattern.
I would definitely attribute that voice to my grandma for sure. Yeah. My grandpa was just like, you're done. Yeah. He was he was a very stern man. Yeah. And so I went to this big gym, right? There were some voc rehab programs and they helped get you around. And I ended up at this big gym, a big corporative gym. And I literally just walked in and I was like, hi, I'm really excited to be here. I love fitness and I want to teach exercise. Like I want to learn about it. And I want to teach it. Go. I was like ready to conquer the fitness world. And this is what happened. I still remember the look. And I mean, I still was kind of pudgy, I just gotten out of prison and it's not like they had the best food and I could only exercise so much, and my metabolism was all messy from having contributed from the addiction. And, I guess I maybe didn't look the part, and the look that was given to me was just kind of like, oh, okay. Did you want a membership?
They just might not know how to deal with somebody coming in that doesn't just want that membership. I don't even know what to do here.
Right. So I sat down with one of the assistant managers and he carefully asked me some questions about my past. And it was very open and very honest. Like I was ready to create a new beginning. Mm-hmm. And, it took a little bit of persuasion, but he finally just looked at me and said, after a couple of conversations, he's like, you're just not trainer material. Like your past and, you can maybe have a job at the front desk selling memberships.
Oh, geez.
And I was heartbroken.
I bet.
I mean, it felt like a gut punch.
Yeah, you're ready to conquer the world. And you're, like you said when we started this conversation, you're being vulnerable and you're putting yourself out there and sharing, an intimate side of yourself with a stranger, hoping that they're going to reciprocate and, help with this opportunity. It doesn't sound like you got that back.
No. And if I remember correctly, I'd actually called and they had told me who to come in and ask for, and they were really excited to hear me over the phone. Apparently my voice didn't match what they were expecting to walk through the door. And that's where everything kind of hits pause for a minute. I just got real depressed, got into a relationship that wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't, nothing super bad happened. It just, I started claiming unemployment and we went on a lot of bike rides and hiked and I learned how to camp. It wasn't my favorite thing to do, but
it almost just kills your motivation to keep moving yourself forward.
And my boyfriend at the time, he was such he was so impactful and part of the person that I am today. He told me one time, he was like, if you just tell the truth, you won't ever have a story to remember.
That's what I tell my kids.
And I was like, because I would just start talking, and it's like my imagination and a little bit of the leftover, psychoses from the drug use would just kind of take on a life of its own, and my stories would just start rolling out of my mouth.
And once you start talking, it's hard to stop.
And I would be like, I don't know quite how that story escalated to that point, but that was not true.
This might not be the case, but do you think it'd be fair to say that maybe you feel like you have to prove yourself at that point?
That's a great observation. Yes, I did feel like I had to prove myself. And for the next 10 years, I felt like I had to prove myself over and over and over again.
I can relate to that. And the reason I'm asking that is because through kind of the dark times that I went through, I realized that I talked a lot. I mean, I was doing things and I was doing actions, but I talked a lot because I felt like I needed to prove myself to other people. I needed to validate that I'm good enough for you to, show your attention, or I'm cool enough to hang out with. And so let me tell you all these things, either I'm going to do, or, and instead of just putting your head down and doing it and finding that happiness within yourself.
Yeah. Well, and just as you were saying that, I look back at the picture that I've just painted for the last 10 years. That's what I did when I was trying to be bad. I was trying to prove that I could be bad enough to hang out with the bad guys.
Bad enough to be cool?
Yeah, I was bad enough to be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wanted to be gangster cool, so I wanted to be as bad as I could be.
It's like you're looking for a place to fit in. Yeah. And it's almost like you have to, and maybe not, this isn't true for everybody, but it's almost like you have to go to kind of the depths of hell to find what that rock bottom feels like for you, to realize that this isn't where I want to be anymore. And it's unfortunate when sometimes you get so deep, it's really, really hard to dig yourself back out.
Yeah, I definitely hit, and I thought I had hit that bottom a couple of times, but I definitely hit it. But this, couple years of just kind of blah, like it was just kind of blah. I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't doing anything.
And that's after this meeting with this person when you were gung-ho that I'm going to do this.
I quit running. I quit working out. I rode my bike with my boyfriend. Like, he liked to ride bikes. And so we went up to Lewiston, did the trail, the big long trail up at Lewiston. We had some great adventures.
Did you have any other hobbies or anything at this point? Like anything else that you like to do? Do you have a secret talent? Like, you said you like to sing, but do you
he
draw?
He even had a piano, and I would occasionally go in and tinker around on the piano. He said he used to love to listen to me play. I don't remember playing anything, remarkable for him. I just did a little bit of, just free,
little bit of noodling.
No, I didn't have any hobbies. And my granny, so she wasn't my grandma, but she was my friend's granny. And I was pretty close to her. Her name was Virginia. And she went by Ginny, and she was from Virginia. And she smoked Virginia Slims.
Oh, geez.
And she had long nails and always wore red lipstick. And she had white hair. And she just kind of adopted me. And she used to tell me, she'd say, Ashley Kate, you are so smart and your legs are so pretty. You need to go do something with them. She would always talk about my legs. So at some point I had developed runner's legs was what I took that to understand.
Oh, funny.
And I wasn't going anywhere. My boyfriend was cheating on me. And I rode my bike to my granny's house, and she said, Ashley Kate, why don't you come stay here? She said, you can stay in that room, but I want you to go enroll in school. You're so smart. I want you to get into college. So I could go there. There was a stipulation, but it felt kind of intriguing. Yeah. And I discovered the path at the rec center.
Oh, okay.
And I started running again. I enrolled at Treasure Valley Community College. I started back into college.
What are you studying?
So I was just doing a general associate's. I was thinking about doing accounting because I really liked numbers. But then everything took like a sharp turn. And I realized that part of my draw to the gangster world was this Hispanic culture. La cultura hispana was very, very intriguing to me. And I realized that I had watched my boyfriend be, when I went to prison, he had some family that was here legally and some family that wasn't here legally. And afterwards, I found out that he was actually bringing people up over the border. He went to federal prison.
Oh, geez.
I was interviewed by the feds about all sorts of stuff that I didn't really know was going on. He was bringing some people up legally and some people up illegally. And when his family got deported, it was really sad. And I remembered, because some of them would come through the jail where I was. And I remember people being really scared to advocate for themselves because they weren't sure if they were here legally or not.
Oh.
And so in case they were going to get someone in trouble, they just allowed themselves to be deported. And I was like, what if there was someone with, that had their, that was an attorney that could advocate for people that were scared to ask those questions. And so I started going into poli-sci.
Okay.
Is where I kind of started heading in. So I just was going to get a general associate's thing in business. And then I headed over to College of Idaho as a non-traditional student. So at this time, I'm 29 years old. I have my associates. I also have, Jonathan, I had a baby during this whole time. That I do want to rewind and highlight that moment when I did get my job, when I finally got a job. I got into school. I started running again. I started fitness. And I went. It had been
you're doing it on your own. You're not doing classes or anything.
No. I just doing it on my own, like the videos in my own apartment space in my granny's, and I went to the local Sizzler. And I walked in and it was when I found out I was pregnant and I was like, I've got to get a job. I'm going to be going to school. I need a car. I'm going to have a baby. Like, I better get things figured out quick. And it was the first time it had been a little over 7 years since my conviction. So I didn't have to check that little box. So it was the first time I could apply for a job and not have to tell anyone, what my past conviction. I
can't imagine the weight that is lifted from you when you feel like that's not, you're not having to drag that weight.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of scary. I was kind of like, am I cheating? Should I have told them? And I made this motto for myself that, it was kind of accompanied with be the change, but it's shifted, right? Because I had already become the change that I wanted to see. Now I just needed to do the right thing. So if I just didn't lie, right? I wasn't deceitful. And I went above that and I did the right thing. Like, I cleaned all the crevices in the high chairs. I didn't just wipe them out really quick. If I really truly rolled all 50 sets of silverware, I didn't just eyeball it or weigh the bin. You're
not shortcutting anything.
Yes, but I was trying to prove myself. I was proving myself to me, to my employer, to the world, that I was no longer this person who used to have to check that box. And if I just did the right thing, that good things would happen. I believed that.
And did that shift when you found out you were pregnant? Or okay, I got you.
It started to shift right before. I had gone to my granny's and I had started to get enrolled in school. I actually got.
So things are starting to kind of
they were
law of attraction. Good things are happening. More good things are coming to you.
Yeah, like I had goals.
Okay,
I had goals, and at that point, I had a vehicle, and I was. I was starting to become somewhat independent and I was doing it all myself. I didn't have any help, which is a very, very empowering feeling, but it's also a pretty isolating feeling. Yeah. I mean, I didn't have any, I decided that in order to be successful, I could not have anything to do with former friends or lifestyle, like 100% disconnect. And that was the only way that I was going to be able to be successful.
How hard was that for you? Because there's so often that people want to change, and so they're going to move to a new state or move to a new city. How hard was that for you still being here in the Treasure Valley and having all this, relatively close by and trying to create this new life, but not have these same run-ins with these same places and situations and people?
I just had to make a decision to not frequent that.
Gotcha.
I made a decision, and that decision was very distinct in my brain, and it was, I'm going to choose to not return. I am not going to return to those people, those places, those things. I will not ever return to prison. And I made and that's a good question, and I'd like to come back to that because I think that I almost felt like it was unfair that I was able to make that decision and stay away from it because look where I'm sitting now. I never returned. Like, I made that decision. I turned 180 and I continued pushing forward in the right direction. I don't exactly know that I have a solid answer on why I was able to do that.
I was just going to ask that. Why were you able to find your way through this when so many people can't?
And
or they can, but they don't?
I think, so I've always, even in that situation when I was released, I've always been willing to be vulnerable. And I believe that God or the universe, or whoever your higher power is, knows the desires of your soul. And there was something inside of me, Jayk. I wanted to be successful. I did want to be noticed. I just didn't know how to get noticed in the right way, right? And it wasn't even necessarily that I wanted to be noticed, but there was this part of me that had this desire to do things and create change and touch lives. I just didn't know how to connect. I didn't know what path I was supposed to follow. And when I finally found the beginning of that path, there was literally no stopping me. I was determined that this is where I was going to go. And having a baby, becoming pregnant at the very beginning of that journey changed a lot of things for me. I realized that this little human was going to be dependent on me for
it's not just you now.
Everything. So I enrolled in some programs. There was one called Baby Haven. It was very, just trying to survive. Low income housing, getting food box at the Salvation Army, which is where I found that Baby Haven program. And not a lot of that changed for the first 4 or 5 years of my son's life. It was a struggle to survive. But what did happen is I graduated Treasure Valley Community College. I got into College of Idaho as a non-traditional student. But in that time, I had gotten a gym membership at the YMCA. And there's a lot of financial assistance offered.
But I know that there's, from what we've shared back and forth, that the Caldwell YMCA holds a special place with you.
Yes, and I still work there. I still teach 2 exercise classes there a week. I walked into the Caldwell YMCA. It was that, so we've had 2 Snowmageddons since then, but it was the first Snowmageddon in 2012 that we had, and it was, I think, single digits by the end of November. It was really cold, and I had been trying to jog and trying to do my step aerobics videos, and finally I was like, something just had to change. Like, I just couldn't.
You got as far as you could with that, and
I got as far as I could, but it wasn't. I wasn't motivated.
Wasn't fulfilling you.
Yeah, I wasn't motivated to do it on my own. What I didn't know is that I was needing a community.
Yes.
I didn't know that that's what I was seeking. And my little inner soul led me right to the Caldwell YMCA, where I was gifted a membership in Kids Zone, and I couldn't even make it around the track for 20 minutes before I was so out of breath. But that is another pivotal point that just changed the trajectory of my life.
It's interesting you say that, because it makes me think about like the honesty with ourselves and the authenticity and the vulnerability. When we're stuck in this hell and we're trying to find our way out, but we're beating ourselves up, you don't allow yourself to be open to allow people in to that degree, to engage in community, and which is kind of goes back to the reason for like this podcast and all these things is it's people. I need people. I need to allow people to in my life. And the only way that I can do that and feel like I can really engage is if I just put it out there and accept myself, flaws and all, and just be vulnerable, to your point, and let it out there. And it sounds like that's kind of where you hit that point, and almost like the Caldwell YMCA walking in was kind of that catalyst to really just open you up and make you realize that.
It was. The membership director at the time was, I kind of whispered to her, I was like, I need to do something different. And I have some money in my diaper bag, which at the time was a pillowcase. I had a pillowcase that I was carting, and I had a used like Eddie Bauer kind of baby Bjorn that some friends, I didn't even have a family to throw me a baby shower. My manager and a couple of my coworkers at Sizzler threw me a baby shower. And, I had a few pieces of gear, but I was really on my own with that. And when I walked in, I was, carrying him and had a big blanket around, and I was holding all my stuff in a pillowcase. And she was like, I don't want you to give me any money. Why don't we go, what's your son's name? And I was like, Jonathan. She's like, let's go check him into the Kids Zone, and you go upstairs for a little bit. And when you're done working out, you come down and talk to me. And I did, like I said, I didn't make it quite an hour, but I just did some calf raises and some stretches, and, walked around, looked intimidatingly at the gym equipment. And,
where do I start?
Gosh, it was exciting. It was scary. It was really, really cool. I wanted to jump in, but I didn't know how and I didn't know where. And there's still that kind of, bad taste in my throat from the experience I had had. And, throughout my entire incarceration and those following couple of years, people told me all the time, you're a number. You're not going to amount to anything. You're back again. You will never be successful. I can't count how many times I heard that, except for from the recreation coordinator. And so I had to combat that belief over and over again. And so this time I was like, do the right thing. Don't be dishonest. I didn't know I was saying be vulnerable. I didn't know what that word meant at that point in my life. And I told her, and I kind of got quiet and I whispered and I was like, I used to be an addict. And she was like, what? And I was like, I really want to exercise, but I'm afraid I might start using meth again.
Oh, jeez.
And she was just, I found out later, the Y would only offer, up to 90% FA. They want a little bit to be given by the person. She paid out of pocket for the rest of my membership. And
just a kind soul.
Yeah. And it changed everything for me.
I think that there's a lot, though, that when the right people see somebody trying to help themselves, and it sounds like you don't seem to be the kind of person where you were looking for a handout or you were running around saying, this world is screwing me.
No.
You were just trying to work through these experiences and find your way the best that you could on your own, really. And people saw you doing that and were willing to kind of, stretch out that hand to you were already at that 90% to try to get you to, across that line.
Yeah. And over the next 6 months, I kind of hid out in my hoodie on the ellipticals and tried to take some weight off because I really felt like I needed to look a certain way before I went into the group exercise classes. But I really wanted to go to this kickboxing class. It was so cool. It looked really neat. I hadn't quite, I was still running was still a little hard on my joints, postpartum and I was still kind of heavy. And so I hadn't really started running anything more than a mile or two at that point, but I felt confident enough to go down to a turbo kick class. And I started taking turbo kick and I took to it, man, just like that.
You were in your spot.
I was. And the instructor recognized it. The directors recognized it. They asked me if I wanted to become certified and be a volunteer instructor.
Isn't that interesting? So you went in initially asking to try to do this and you kind of almost get, eyeballed out of the building and now you're just doing the thing and now people are approaching you with exactly what you were trying to get in the first place.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was great. I remember saving and I got a money order. For my first certification. Wow. And I found out later that the instructor was going to pay for it if I hadn't been able to come up with the money, but I did. I wanted that.
How many certifications do you have now?
Oh, more than I can count.
Really?
More than 20.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yeah, more than 20. Yeah. And so I got the certification, and then when it came time to fill out the volunteer application, the YMCA is a very different facility. So I had to be really open and honest about my past.
They deep dive pretty deep into the people that are involved with it.
Heavy background checks.
Yeah.
So I was honest. And because I had already built a relationship with people there and they knew me, and the only me that they know is the me of that day. They knew this.
That's a great point.
The girl who was excited about exercise.
They're not judging you on this past.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No. So the things that needed to happen, they were able to get me in as a volunteer.
So were you trying then at this point to get back into this, direction of fitness being kind of your desired direction, or were you just back to where you were just exercising for yourself and then they approached you this time and it rekindled that fire to go back in this direction?
Yes, the latter part of what you said.
Gotcha.
And it was so exciting, and I started I was nervous, but I got to start volunteer teaching turbo kick, and then came time, the insanity certifications were coming out.
I did insanity too, and holy smokes, I kicked my butt, but one of the best things I've ever done.
Man, and I didn't know it at the time, but again, we've talked about somatic healing. I didn't know how much healing was going on while I was moving.
Can you explain that in more details? Explain somatic healing.
Okay, so somatic is just anything that has to do with your body, right? And so somatic healing is when you are moving. It could be massage could be a type of somatic healing when you're moving parts of your body, right? But somatic healing for me, and from what I've learned, I'm no expert on it, but I've taken classes and I see a therapist who does a lot of somatic and parts work. And when you're moving your body, it's your body's way of transferring energy, and it's getting the bad stuff out, and it's letting the good stuff come in. And our bodies were meant to move.
Healing by movement.
Yes, healing by movement. That's a great way to shorten that sentence. And so I worked full time at Sizzler, and I would go work out at the Y afterwards and use the childcare and teach a class or two here or there. And then I got my second certification, and my volunteerism got noticed by the health and well-being director, and they had some positions opening up. And so they decided to bring me on as an official paid instructor for the classes I was already teaching. And so that slowly started. Then they had some openings where what were called floor engagement, where you just walk around the exercise floor and engage with people. And I'm like, but I'm not a trainer. They're like, we just want you to be there to build connections with people. And so some of my Sizzler hours slowly started going into YMCA hours. And at that time, minimum wage was still really, well, I guess it's still really low, but, people weren't making like $14, $16 an hour. Everything was $8 or $9 an hour at that point.
$2 an hour and tips.
But you made 12 something, almost 13 teaching group exercise because you have to pay for and hold those certifications and continuing education credits. And so the Y was really investing in me. Yeah. And people were believing in me, and things were changing inside of me, and my confidence was growing. And I was, when they say you blossom where you're planted.
Yeah. Love that saying.
If you're planted in the right place, if you get planted in concrete, you might be able to make it through the cracks. You see some little flowers growing up through the cracks in concrete, and I'd like to say I'm one of those flowers.
Yeah.
Like the resilience of being able to bloom in prison and then be vulnerable and real in my, what I call it, my transitional period. And now here I am, going to college, supposed to be for poli-sci, but the poli-sci department said that I wasn't good enough for them.
You're not poli-sci material.
I was not poli-sci material. So I was taking business classes. And at this point, now I'm taking AMP, anatomy and physiology and nutrition, and all of my electives are fitness and nutrition based. And then I decided to take a plunge and go ahead and get my NASM and get certified as a personal trainer.
Nice.
And so all of those things, it was very hard.
I got all the books and tried to study, and I
barely passed.
I gave up on it.
I barely passed, but I did pass. Taking that test, that proctored exam, I passed. And that's when I kind of made my decisions. Like, this is really where my passion and my focus is, and if everything continues to align. So I was working part-time at Sizzler and working part-time at the YMCA, and over the course of a year and a half, my part-time job at the YMCA became a full-time position.
That's awesome.
I had over 20 clients. I had run my first marathon, qualified for Boston in a pair of Skechers Delights because I didn't know any better about the shoes.
Oh, geez. And you did finish Boston too, I think, didn't you?
I did. I didn't get to go that time. I couldn't raise enough money to.
I just remember seeing something about you did finish Boston at some point.
Yeah, I did Boston. I qualified for and ran Boston in 2018. I ran.
Probably not in Skechers.
Not in Skechers, no. But by that point, I was definitely running in Hoka's. I had met Fleet Feet and Alex and all of those guys at that point, and we'd gotten me into some real shoes.
So let's talk about that relationship, because that's kind of how we connected. Is I had this discussion with Alex, and you have a connection there. At what point did this whole thing transition into, that connection? And what are you doing with Fleet Feet?
So I am the head coach and training programs coordinator for Fleet Feet. I get the opportunity to write all of the content and run the 3 main training programs that Fleet Feet that Fleet Feet runs throughout the year, which are Roby Creek. We do 5-10K program in the spring and a 5K through marathon training program in the fall. I basically get to go out and run with people, like, for a job.
Awesome is that?
It's so amazing.
Like, as we're going through this conversation, you just keep lighting up every time you start talking about these things. It's so awesome to see. I love that.
Thank you. Yeah. I feel like when I look at it from the outside looking in, I'm like living this dream. It's just phenomenally amazing. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for the YMCA giving me my start.
Yeah.
But
it's
everything
up to
is
you
kind
what
of,
you do with that.
Yeah, a reason, season, or a lifetime, right? I will forever, for my whole life, have a place with the YMCA. Like, I will always.
It's family.
Yes, in some way, that organization believed in me. And right now I get to work for the races department. That's the main thing that I do with the Y.
All of these things that they always say, everybody always says, find your passion, whatever, find your purpose, follow your passion, all that. I think you almost have to cultivate it. I don't think it's as easy as just, here's this thing, I'm going to go after it. You almost have to just live life and have these experiences and try things, and then
and not be afraid to fail.
That's it, exactly.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Yes. So this is in my head, and I want to ask you about it before I lose this thought. Mom Fleet?
Yes. So
explain that to me.
Throughout my fitness journey, right, I started running and I realized that I was really good at it. And
you said you were winning races, you had your podium finishes, you're getting it done.
By 2017, I had completed 2 Ironman 70.3s. I don't have really any desire to do that again, but that just sounds like work. I love running marathons, right? I love the marathon distance. I also love trails. That's a whole nother conversation. But I was doing both. So I had X amount of daycare hours, and you can't just take your kid in and out of daycare. So I would work X amount of hours and then I'd have a break. So I started filling that break with running, and then I'd finish out my work shift, and I got really good at running. I remember getting ready for my Boston qualifier, and I was out in Caldwell on my break running, I think 18 or 20 miles. And I was like, oh man, I gotta be back for my client. It's going to be a push run today. And I clocked that 20-mile run at like 7:45s. It was, or maybe it was 8:05s by the time I finished. I was booking. It was
just win.
Yeah. I mean, I got back and someone was like, I just saw you out on Homedale Road. And I was like, oh no, that was like 30 minutes ago. And she was like, I just drove by you on my drive here. My drive here is like 15 miles. And so it was always kind of a joke, that AK was always running around Caldwell. And when 2019 hit, I had a really big health scare in 2018. I had ran Boston, didn't do as well as I would like, but I did qualify. Or no, Boston's not where I qualified, but I qualified for the next Boston, I think is what my time on that one was. But it was that rainy, sleety, terrible Boston. Someone had taught me the trick of putting a Ziploc bag between your sock and your shoe, but I only had one. Oh, so I chose which foot was gonna get to stay kind of dry.
Which foot did you choose?
Left.
Yeah. Are you left-footed?
No, but my left foot had been having some plantar fasciitis.
Oh, okay.
So I, which of course I was running through. I don't do that now. Stated for
I need
record.
to be better about that. If it hurts, I tend to get stubborn and lean into it.
So I trained really hard, and I ran a half marathon that was a qualifier for New York, and I qualified.
Jeez.
And I was so excited. And then I had a pretty major health scare at the end of 2018.
I think I was reading about this. You shared a couple of blog posts with me that I had read through, and it's not a small health scare. I mean, do you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah. So I was helping a friend qualify for Boston at a marathon in Snoqualmie. And she did qualify.
Nice.
And I was on track to PR, and I literally got to mile 18, and I sat down at an aid station with CEP compression socks on. We know the struggle to get those off, right? And on, especially sweaty during a race.
Yeah.
I took my entire sock off, changed a Band-Aid around my blister, waited for my friend. She ran past. I'm like, I'll put my sock on and catch up with you. Very odd behavior for intra-race.
Right.
Put it back on and started running again. Did catch up with her, and we finished the race. She qualified for Boston. And on the way home, on the flight, I was just in excruciating, doubled over pain. It resulted in, 2 days of the people in the emergency room told me I had rhabdo because I ran too much with too little hydration or fuel, sent me home. Sometimes we do get a little bit of stigma from the medical community.
Sure, yeah.
Unfortunately, it's unfortunate, but it does happen.
Right.
And 36 hours later, I was still on my living room floor. So my friend drove me to urgent care. Urgent care took one look at me and said, take her to the hospital now. It took about 5 days for them to get in and do exploratory surgery. They weren't able to see, but when I was 18, 19, I had an ovary removed, I had some cysts and stuff going on in there, a tumor, and there was scar tissue that was creating what are called adhesions. And I certainly didn't have great health care for a decade being incarcerated, and I wouldn't have known to look for it anyways.
Right.
And they started grabbing my appendix, got caught with the adhesions in my bowel. And so when they did the CT scans, it just looked like my appendix was a little irritated. They couldn't see what was going on. When they went in and did exploratory surgery, I looked like I was about 7 months pregnant. That's how much distension and inflammation was going on in my gut.
Holy crap.
And they ended up cutting me open, didn't know what was viable, tried to strip and calm everything down, pack me together, put me in ICU overnight, went in the next day, which was a Saturday. I always thought that was pretty impressive that the surgeon just decided to come back on Saturday instead of saying, not viable, here's a bag, go on with your life,
Right.
He came back and thankfully they only had to remove about a foot of my small intestines, and then my entire ascending colon is gone. So they had to attach a part of my bowel to the duodenum. I have looked at a diagram. I don't know if I fully understand exactly what they did, but basically my poop maker had to refigure out how to do its job.
Holy moly.
Yeah. And so it took about three months for me to even be able to go back to work. I was very weak. I lost a lot of weight, a lot of muscle mass. I wasn't on a feeding tube for 13 days. So
what does that do to your head? You're going you've changed your life.
Yeah.
You're on top
was
of the world.
sponsored by 6 or 7 different local companies so that I could go do these races. I was a single mom,
You're just doing it.
Just a moderately paying job, not the YMCA is a nonprofit. It doesn't have
they're
fabulous,
not just dumping out cash.
It doesn't have fabulous salaries. And so I had a lot of sponsors that just loved my story, relationships that I had created in the community with physical therapists and engineering companies. And that's how I was.
Were you on a billboard?
Yeah, I was on a billboard twice. Yeah, twice. Part of it was for that. It was West Valley.
Okay, that's what it was.
Yeah, West Valley did a whole signature series and did a commercial on my recovery, because from the time that I went into West Valley, which was in August of 2018, until I was able to come back and run my first race back, which was probably March of 2019, I was just physically and mentally so weak. That's when I started doing therapy.
I was going to ask, how do you keep yourself from falling back into that old hole?
It just wasn't an option. It was not an option. I had a taste of how amazing life could be. I had a little human that was dependent on me, and he doesn't have a dad. So I'm it.
Yeah.
I'm what he's got. And I just, there
was no other option.
No, there was no other option. The option was, what do I need to do
to heal?
Yeah. And there was a lot more than just my body that needed to heal this time. There was a lot of, the body, there's a book out there called The Body Knows the Score. And
I've heard of that one.
when your body goes through trauma, it manifests itself in different ways, right? When your body's trying to get your attention, it may not actually be that you have a stomach ache, but something going on there is trying to tell you. And so I have a really amazing relationship with my body today, right? Something's going on, or I feel this and I'm like, hey, how's it going? What do you need from me?
Listen to it.
What are you trying to communicate? I try to talk to it like I would my children, to have that loving relationship with myself.
Which that might actually tie into something I think you had said when we were going back and forth. We were talking about the relationship with your body, and all the parts of you have a fair and equitable seat at the table.
Yes. So that has to do with, all the parts of me, the addict, the control freak who was like, you will not talk to these people. You will not go here. You will not drive there. She served a really strong purpose for me. But her job is not to keep my son from making a mess, right? There's a lot of different moving parts inside of every single person and every single body. And I think that now that I let the insecure part have a seat at the table and be heard, and I let the confident athlete have a seat at the table and be heard.
And it sounds like you're not afraid of it. You're not afraid of letting all of them have an equal voice.
Well, I try not to be afraid of it, but it takes a lot of work.
I bet.
It takes a lot of work it's taken a lot of work over the last 5 years to get to be where I am today. And
I'm sure it never stops. It's ongoing every day.
Continuous work that we just aren't aware of all of the things that are going on inside of our bodies and our soul and that are trying to get our attention. I started trying to somatically heal my body years and years ago. My body knew there were adhesions going on in there, and it knew that, X amount of miles, it was going to get them to get taken care of. It took, a medical tragedy to happen to get it fixed, but it did get fixed.
So let me ask you this. One of the things I've realized, and especially as getting older and I'm having to pay more attention to it, is I realized that because of the mental pain that I went through when I was younger, I could force myself through serious physical pain. And it was to the point where, kind of almost to your point where or I don't want to say this and put words in your mouth, where I would feel something and I would force myself through it because I felt like I was mentally stronger than the pain I was feeling, almost to a detriment, to where now it's to that point where as you get older, you have to slow down and pull back and say, and as you're saying, listen to that part of your body and, hey, what are you trying to tell me here? And
curious.
Yes.
Going into life now, that's one of my missions, is to be more curious.
Yes.
Like if I could approach things with a better voice of curiosity,
absolutely,
instead of judgment or feeling like I need to just fix something. It may not need fixed. It just needs heard.
That's a great point.
And that's, kind of where my journey took me. Is I was a sponsored athlete, although I still had a lot of insecurity about my body. I didn't feel like I looked like a runner for years and years. I wish I had embraced it when I had that body. But I hit so many podiums between March and December of 2019 and qualified ran New York in 2019, qualified for Chicago, and then COVID happened, right? I don't know if that's a dirty word or we're not supposed to say it, but
it is what it is.
It literally changed our world. It changed the running community. It changed races.
It changed how people interact with each other, which again goes back to part of the reasons for this is I feel like we're losing the ability to have real conversations, to interact face-to-face with people.
Yes. And I think we're just now really starting to get that back.
Right. I agree.
I think that things are on those connections and relationships are important. And I do think that it has brought an awareness where it's okay to respect somebody else's boundaries.
Right.
If they're feeling a sniffle or, a cold coming on and I don't want to get sick, I think it's a very, very well received if you're like, hey, I'd rather skip this session today. Yeah. Let's figure something else out to keep you active instead of being in person. So I think that our whole community, our world is just getting into such a better place. Yeah. So this journey from sponsored athlete, and I was hashtagging sponsored athlete on everything. There's a race that I came in second overall female called Resort to Rock in 2019. The race directors actually reached out to me about a year later, I think when they were looking at the results. They're like, can you send me your Garmin? I think they were actually, which I love the race directors for that race too. Like they're two women that I love and admire.
I actually helped start that race.
So cool. Well, it's the only race that I've ever trained specifically for besides Roby. I went up every weekend and ran the course.
Yeah, it's beautiful running up there.
Yeah, it is. It's just a commitment for a drive to go up there.
It is, yeah.
So I was really proud of myself when I went up there and I trained on it and I came in second. Second next
That's
to
awesome.
Rachel Ingalls, who is phenomenal runner. And
it's a tough course.
Yeah, and it's a very technical and tough course. And my best friend from junior high was coming in from Arizona to run that with me.
Nice.
And so it was it was a very important race for me to be able to maybe even keep up with him. He's a very uber elite athlete. And he was actually very instrumental. I would watch his posts and I'm like, man, if he could do it, I could probably get there. Yeah. Whole reason I did triathlons. So as, fast forward, right, the last 4 years, sticky relationship, another baby in my 40s. I gave birth to a baby at 43. That's, hard on the body already.
Unexpected.
Very unexpected. It was really important to me to be able to breastfeed him. I hadn't had that experience with my first one. And I went and I sought out support, and what it really came down to is I was kind of transitioning in between careers. At COVID, things went down to part-time. And so that's when I met Alex from Fleet Feet.
Okay.
And so that's when that relationship started. And I started volunteering for some of the run groups he was doing. And, COVID kind of put a hold on things. And then things were starting to pick back up. But I was in after I had my second son, I was in a pretty low place. I would say the lowest place mentally and psychologically that I had been since my early 20s.
And why is that?
I had, not to elaborate too much, but I had gone through, I didn't date for the first 10 years of my older son's life. I didn't want anyone in and out. So I made a conscious decision. And then I did decide to get into kind of a committed relationship shortly after COVID. And I think that everyone was feeling a sense of isolation. And I jumped into things really quickly. And it just...
Take your time.
The relationship dynamic changed dramatically after I moved in. And after a few months, my son and I were not in a 100% safe situation. And so in a really quick blink of an eye after an incident that could have escalated, I got to a point where I said, you know what, this is not going in a safe direction. And I waited and I made some plans and I literally moved out 5 days later.
Oh, wow.
The hard part about that is that I was 8 weeks pregnant.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And so I had to make some really intentional decisions. And
it's not just you at that point, because now you have your son with you as well.
Yeah. And so it was just a series of hard events, Jake. It was probably harder events for me than when I went to prison.
Really?
Yeah. And so I was sad. I was sad. My body was so different. My number one priority was being able to nourish my baby and be a mom to my older son and make sure that he never had to be a parent. And so I went through a series of therapy sessions with my counselor on how to create an environment that was safe for my almost teenager being an older brother and never having to take on the responsibilities of a dad, and how to navigate this relationship with this individual that was the father of my child that was no longer a safe human for me to interact with. And it was so much.
You're just spinning at that point.
Yeah, I was heavy. I was heavy. My body was heavy. My soul was heavy. But at the same time, I just made a decision. I was like, I'm going to use up all the savings I have and I'm going to stay home as long as I can. And when I go back, I'm not going back to jobs that I have to put my kids in daycare for excessive amounts of hours. And there was a transition happening in my brain. And I knew that fitness was always going to be a part of me. The why was always going to be a part of my career. But I just didn't know where things were going at this point. And I do have a private coaching business. So I had a handful of private clients that I was able to do virtual and create, running and fitness programs with. And if there is anything to be said about something that I'm very confident about is that I am a great coach.
I wanted to ask you about that. How did things change for you when you went from an athlete to a coach?
I didn't just go from an athlete to a coach. I evolved into a coach. So I was a trainer and an exercise instructor, and then I became an athlete. And then it evolved into coaching others through different certifications that I had.
Okay.
And when you are in your passion, and I'm sure you know this, you intuitively are able to process information and help people become the best version that they can be in the field that you're in.
Yeah.
You know, when you're where you're supposed to be, like it just happens. And so I love coaching. I love exercise. I love fitness. I have a really interesting relationship with nutrition. It's not meal plans and macros. Like it's about the relationship that you have with food and what it's doing to nourish and pleasure your body, right? Because food is for both of those purposes. Right. And so I get mostly with women, I mostly counsel women with nutrition, or coach rather. So as I came back into this, I honestly thought my athlete career was done. I was like, you know, when you put your hands up, what is it? Waving the white flag. I was surrendering. I was surrendering. And in this moment, Alex from Fleet Feet, you know, we'd been doing a few things here and there together, and he reached out for a meeting. And I was like, well, is it okay if I have Grayson with me? He was my, 5-month-old at the time, and he was still nursing, and he wasn't in daycare. I hadn't gone back to work except to do things that I could have him with me, office work. And, thankfully the things that I had done up to that point, and I had some families really reach out and support me during that time, both financially and, just helping me. Yeah. And I was able to survive for that, 5 or 6 months before I really needed to like put the rubber to the road and start worrying about my finances. Again, yeah. And so he met with me, and it was my last deferral, right, to Chicago. And he wanted to ask some questions about that. He also wanted to propose some things about a new coaching program that Fleet Feet was going to come out with. And I just couldn't believe that I was his choice. I was just so honored that he was
unexpected.
It was so unexpected.
But it was probably in hindsight at the perfect time.
110%, like 1000% at the perfect time. And, he was asking, Alex is really, really intentional, which I'm sure you got to know about relationships, connections, and questions.
Absolutely. And he's amazing.
He really wanted to know, how was my running going? Because he watched me go from podium after podium to just like radio silence. And that was really strange. And I think that's what shot a red flag to him.
One of the things that I really admire with him is he truly does care about the people. I won't even say the people, the person. He is present, and he is engaged. And if there's anybody that lives a life in service of others, it's that dude.
Oh, I agree. I agree 100%. And in a previous conversation I had with him, he was like, AK, we don't really sponsor people and, do stuff. A lot of people come and say they're going to do this and this with us. And then we let them have this and this, and then they're gone. And I remember looking at him and I said, Alex, I cannot wait for you to see that I am the exact opposite of that. I can't wait to show
prove him wrong.
To show you, basically prove him wrong and show you the commitment that I have to the running community and how grateful I am for this pair of shoes. I really wanted to show him my gratitude, and I did everything that I could within my means to support Fleet Feet and the programs that they were doing. And when we sat down for this conversation, my son was 5 months old. I had to nurse him a couple times, and he was like, well, AK, what about Chicago? And that's where he's from. He was like, what happened? And I was like, oh, yeah, this is the last year I can use my deferral, so it's not going to happen. And he was like, but why not? We're like 10 months out. And I was like, well, Alex, it's not just the training. It's
a financial commitment there.
I'm barely back to work. I really don't want to have to leave my boys to, I was just very vulnerable and real. There's no judgment with him.
Right.
And so I gave him all the reasons. And he was like, okay, well, let's take that out of the equation. He's like, how can Fleet Feet help you? And I was just like, what? are you kidding me? And it wasn't just like, hey, let's take, he just wanted to take the barriers away. And it was in that moment that I received hope. My hope came back. My light was like there. And I was like, oh my gosh. So all I have to do is start running again. I don't know if my body's ready for that.
It almost sounds like you needed somebody to believe in you again as much as you believed in yourself.
Yeah, I did. And it all just started rolling from there. It was not an easy journey to get to Chicago. Like there were some injuries, and a 45-year-old postpartum body is not a 30-year-old postpartum body. It's a very different journey, but that's when my focus shifted, right? And as my spark began to came back, that spark that makes me who I am, that spark.
I wish people could see this smile as you're saying that. It just, you're glowing right now.
Yeah, and I got to fall in love with me.
That's awesome.
And if I had one wish for humanity, it's that everyone would get to fall in love with themselves. Not love themselves, but fall in love with themselves. All versions of themselves, all parts of themselves, every piece of your body. And so I made a commitment to myself. And as we've talked about my history, when I make a commitment, I'm pretty persistent and goal driven.
Absolutely.
So as much as I fluid in listening to my body and being kind and curious, like when I get a goal, like there's going to be a plan. And so I made a decision that I was going to love my body along every moment of the journey, that there would be no self-deprecation about my weight, about my musculature, about my pace, about how often I needed to walk or what foods I needed to eat. And I realized along this journey that the one thing that was the most important to me was putting my boys first, that I was a mom first and an athlete second. And how could I embody that and still be an athlete? And that's where hashtag Momfleet came from. So it's hashtag MOMTHLETE. So it kind of looks like athlete, but mom is in the beginning. And so that became my new identity. And I stroller ran some of the marketing material for Fleet Feet at the Nampa store. You see my toddler in my hiking pack at the Boise Front Trail Run. Fleet Feet gave me this opportunity that I could be a coach and a mom.
That's awesome.
At the same time. And so I've had this amazing transformation into this focus of being a mom first, being an athlete second, and then everything else will fall into place. And if you trust, it will. And it is. And it has. I'm going to London in April.
Oh, that's crazy.
I'm on my 4th star. My big goal as a runner is to get all 6 stars. I know they just added a 7th, but they're still holding the 6-star major. And
well, I wish you luck.
Thank you.
I have no doubt that you're going to get it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Well, let me ask you a question. So what would the you today love to be able to tell 18-year-old you?
You're going to be so amazing. You're going to be amazing. And your journey's not going to be easy. But Jayk, I don't think I'd go back and change anything.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. For all the hardships and the ups and downs, you wouldn't be the person that you are today.
No.
And without the lessons that you've learned to become this person.
And I'm not as afraid of that anymore. I've been working on a project for the last 5 months that has taken me full circle back to the women's prison. And it has been a game changer and a life changer for me. Through this last pregnancy, I really wanted to be able to breastfeed my son. And so when I become passionate about something, I've decided like I need to, if
nothing's going to stop you.
Yeah. And someone's going to get the best version of me, right? So I went through this program at WIC with a peer counselor and was able to successfully breastfeed my son. And he's still nursing and he's a toddler. And so when he was about 5 months old, I called the WIC department and they said, hey, how do you become one of these? And it took a little bit of time, but there's 90 hours of training and they put me through the 90 hours of training. And now one of my part-time jobs is I'm a peer counselor for breastfeeding for WIC, for women, infants, and children. And one of my friends has a daughter who has had several children and not been able to stay out of that revolving door of prison. And this last time she went in pregnant And I didn't know the daughter, but I know my friend, right? And she's raised all of her grandkids. And this time it was different for her. And I've been involved with the children and tried to provide a positive female role model for the younger girl. And, I've really tried to kind of embrace this family because I understand their struggle. But every time that the daughter has gotten out, I've never felt a pull to mentor her or go near her. And it's like my inner self knew she's not staying out. Here's protection.
And I think it's one of those things where you can give everything that you want, but the other person has to be willing to accept it, and they have to be willing to meet you halfway. Otherwise, they're going to be back to the same place that they're in.
Yeah. So this time it felt different when my friend was telling me about her daughter having another baby while she was in prison. And I said, if she's interested, the law actually provides that she should be able to breastfeed her baby and pump her milk. I'd just gone through all this school, so
It's so fresh in your mind.
It's so fresh in my mind. I'm like, if she wants some information, I'd be happy to have some conversations with her and help. And what that ended up turning into is the time was right for all of us. And I've been able to take this little baby up to the prison to breastfeed with her mother every Friday. And I bring home big grocery bags full of pumped milk. That baby's never had any formula. She's a fully breastfed baby. The mother's parole hearing's coming up next week, and I feel so, if you were to ask me what the most meaningful thing that I'm doing in my life right now, that's it. And that's something I'm doing on my own time. I've watched the mother grow. I've watched her sacrifice of her time and her body in a place that it's very easy to just sit back and dissociate from the rest of the world. And I watched that baby get really, really fat and chunky. I had to teach her grandma how to clean the rolls under her neck. They never had a chunky baby.
Oh, jeez.
And through this, I've watched those women going around the track.
Oh,
and I've
nice.
had conversations with the program managers. And I was just listening to your conversation with Dan earlier today, and I just had a conversation with the program manager last week. As soon as I am no longer a visitor, I'm going to apply to be a volunteer to
awesome.
take a running program to the women's prison.
How awesome.
Yeah, and be able
True
to...
impact.
Yeah, right there, direct impact.
When people need it the most and they are the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
I love that.
So
you are absolutely amazing. And the person that sits in front of me is beyond words. What you're doing, not only for yourself, I think you're feeding yourself with being in service to all these people. And by doing these things that it makes such a huge difference to people that don't realize how much they need that connection and they need that positive support and encouragement. And I want to ask you this, since we've been going for a while here, and I don't even know how to wrap this up. I mean, this has been such a crazy,
probably a really long one.
It's been such a crazy emotional ride, and there's so many different directions we could go with this and continue. But I think this is a good place to ask kind of a wrap up question, and it's the question that I like to end these with. But there's something about everything that you've shared with me that I don't even know how you would answer this. But how I would like to kind of tie this up is I want to ask you, what does legacy mean to you? And what's the legacy that you want to leave and be remembered for?
So my legacy is the life that I've lived. And I don't know if it needs to have much more to be said. That was actually after the Be the Change, the second motto with, as that transition from just tell the truth, don't be deceitful, was live your legacy. Don't just lead it. Don't just show it, but the legacy that you leave is the life that you lived.
I love that.
And I think that my life speaks for itself.
Talk less, do more.
Oh, I don't know. I can still talk quite a bit. I still got a lot to say.
Trouble either.
But I think that the most important thing, if you were to ask me, the resounding, what do you want the world to know, is I want my boys to be loved. I want them to love themselves. And I want them to be able to impart that into humanity. And I'd like to think that I now have that relationship with myself And because I do, I can open that door for others, you know?
You can be the light. You can be the change.
Yeah, everyone can. Everyone
Absolutely.
can be the change.
Well, if there's an opportunity for people to, learn more about you, connect with you, how can they do that?
I'm pretty visible. Everything of mine is public. AK Whittaker on Facebook. #momfleet_AK on Instagram. My business cards are in any Fleet Feet that you go into. If you walk into a YMCA and say, how can I contact AK? Most people know who I am.
They can track you down.
Yeah, I'm not hard to track down in this community for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, you're definitely making a difference. There's no question. I'm so beyond happy that we had a chance to sit down and get to know each other a little bit better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was very healing for me. This is the first time I've ever spoke out loud about my past.
Really? Well, I appreciate that you trusted me enough to, sit down and do this in a fairly, open, and I mean, we're sitting here with microphones and headphones and stuff, and you have obviously held nothing back. But if there's anything I can say is that there's no question that you're on the right path, and you can tell that you're living your passion and you're in the right place. Because, like I've said multiple times, it's just been an absolute joy seeing you light up as you talk about these things that really feed your soul. And I appreciate you sharing that with me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of this amazing conversation and the first episode of 2025. A heartfelt thank you to AK for being vulnerable and trusting me with such an emotional and truly inspiring conversation. From the innocence of high school to the depths of addiction, prison cells to marathon finish lines, AK's journey reminds us that it's never too late to rewrite your story. And as someone who's struggled with their own personal demons, I want to highlight to anyone listening right now who might be out there fighting their own battles. Remember AK's words, be the change. Sometimes that first step, whether it's toward recovery, a starting line, or helping others, is all it takes to transform your entire life. But you have to take that first step and allow yourself to be vulnerable. I am always here as a resource to help in any way that I can, and you can connect with me through our website, www.runfromthenorm.com. Thank you again, AK, for sharing your journey with such raw honesty and showing us that our darkest chapters don't have to define our whole story. And thank you, friends, as always, for sharing your time to listen to this episode. And with that, I'm Jayk Reynolds, reminding you to stay curious, embrace authenticity, keep moving forward, and most importantly, get outside and run from the norm.
Check that mic, make sure it sound right, boy.